Okay, so this balloon is like 3 months old. The helium possibly has completely gone away, considering how heavy this balloon has become. We are going to attempt to get some humor out of it. So, yeah, I think all the helium. Oh. Dang it. That was my only intro idea today. I'm sorry. Stupid balloon. What is going on, guys? So today we are back with another video, and really quickly before we get into this, I do want to announce that we have opened up registration for our online tournament in the Discord server. It kind of, depending on how familiar you are with commands and entering commands through Discord, could be a little bit of a challenge to get registered, but it does have to be an exact format because of the way that things are going to basically happen in the future, with like regurgitating the information that you give us to register yourself and with rankings and stuff like that. So just to kind of let you know, we are completely open for registration. We are going to do a cup called the Mistech Forest. It's an original idea, and the entire purpose of doing an original idea first is so that basically we're not tarnishing anyone's like Jungle Cup or Mirror Cup participation. I don't want to like fludge all that up for you guys. Is fludge a word? I just kind of want to do something original to make sure that the system that I'm coming up with works. I'm doing this with a couple of helpers in the Discord server. The bot work is all me though. I'm literally coding everything for the bot by myself. A slow process, but I'm getting around to it. First time I'm working with a couple of different APIs, and it's a whole lot of jargon. So it is open for registration. If you want to, go down into the description below, check out the Discord. There are a group of people called Tournament Mods. Steve, PvP Steve, if you guys have seen his channel, he's actually helping me out with this quite a bit. We also have Riverboy and John Boy who are also helping. If you guys have any questions, if I'm not readily available, I will try to help you, of course, but if I'm not, you can just @the Tournament Mods and they will be there to kind of help as well. Also in the FAQ channel, there's a ton of stuff that kind of helps you with how to get registered and, you know, how the formats work for a lot of the different commands and stuff that we'll be using. But the actual cup is announced, so if you would like to participate in that, definitely go down to the Discord like I said. That's all I'm going to say about it because I feel like I've already rambled on way too long, so let's get started with our deep dive. So today we're actually going to be looking into Gallade, which is a Psychic and Fighting type Pokemon, maxing out at 3,093, so a pretty large CP there. But to get into the Great League with a 0-1 attack, 15 defense, 15 stamina at level 18, you do hit that clean 1496, which does keep you under the 1500 mark, while also yielding a really, really high stat product for you. Now in the freestyle, just in the general Great League Cup, out of all of the 500 some uniquely typed participants, Gallade is actually 311th in bulk and 240th in stat product, so kind of like middle of the road. If we look at both of those, you know, average them together, maybe sort of kind of close to middle of the road, a little bit on the further downside, but as we know, that's not necessarily what determines everything here. A lot of it does come back into our moves here. But of course, all of these numbers here do come from our base stats with a 237 on attack, 195 on defense, and a 169 in stamina. So, speaking of these moves, we do have some quite interesting picks out of these moves here. And this is our first deep dive in the Mirror Cup that has a change in moveset between some cups. I did actually find that Gallade actually performs a little bit better in one of his cups with a different moveset rather than the one that generally does better. So we'll talk about that when we get there. So for our fast moves here, we do have Confusion, Low Kick, and Charm. Confusion gaining 3 energy per turn for 4 damage per turn. We do have a 4.8 after stab. Low Kick, the Underwhelmer here, 2.5 energy per turn for 2 damage per turn. 2.4 after stab, which is our definitely lowest damage output move. And then we do have Charm here for 2 energy per turn. We get 5.33 damage per turn. It is our lowest energy gaining move, but it's a very good trade-off in terms of damage if that's your kind of play style. So in general, the move that actually works the best here is Confusion. But we do actually have some play with Charm here, and we'll talk about whenever we get to our cups which one of these you should really use in the cup. Ultimately, it's up to you guys. This is just a suggestion. Moving on to our charge moves here, we do have Close Combat, Psychic, and Leaf Blade. Leaf Blade being our only non-stab candidate, but a great one to have in terms of Gallade here. So Close Combat here for 60 energy, we get 100 damage at a 1.67 damage per energy ratio. We do have a 120 after stab and a 2.0 on the efficiency there, which is always great. Psychic here is almost the same. We have a 70 energy to fire, 100 damage at a 1.43. After stab, it does get bumped up to 120, just like Close Combat, for a 1.71 on the efficiency though, because we do cost a little bit more to be able to fire that one off. Last, we do have Leaf Blade here for 35 energy, you get 70 damage at a clean 2.0. Of course, we do not carry that grass typing, so no stab benefits there. So, out of the charge moves, if you really start to dig into these, it's kind of clear that Leaf Blade is a huge performer here. Being such low energy cost makes it so much faster than our two other moves, and it really gives Gallade a lot of the speed that he needs to compete with some of the other shield busters out there. And then we also have, between Close Combat and Psychic, they're almost identical, except Close Combat actually costs a little bit less. And because we talked a little bit earlier about choosing between Confusion and Charm, considering that we have Confusion and Charm to choose from, Close Combat still makes a lot of sense because it's going to be type coverage if we're going with Confusion, and it's going to be type coverage if we're going for Charm, whereas Psychic is just kind of like, maybe. It's just not really like hitting on a whole lot. So for the most part today, we are going to focus on Confusion, Close Combat, and Leaf Blade with a little bit of Charm sprinkled in there as well. So as far as Gallade's participation in cups, Gallade actually shows an appearance in the Boulder Cup, the Nightmare Cup, and Season 1 Regionals. So being that the Boulder Cup is quite an interesting cup here, I did find that Confusion definitely outperforms Charm here, and with Confusion, Close Combat, and Leaf Blade, we actually do pretty good. In our 0 versus 0, we actually start out with a 50% win ratio here, only losing to Torterra, Bronzong, Melmetal, Jirachi, and Skarmory. And when you really start to think about these, so Torterra is, I mean, the Razor Leaf monster. If it's using Bite, it's still going to have an interesting matchup against us, but Razor Leaf's just pretty much just going to chunk away at us either way we look at it. And then Bronzong, Melmetal, Jirachi, and Skarmory are all going to be able to resist a lot of that Confusion damage that we're throwing out. So even like Melmetal possibly having, you know, to go up against Close Combat could be interesting for us, but we have to rely on getting to that Close Combat and him not having a shield, and it just ends up being a little bit faster for Melmetal. Jirachi is a similar situation. Going up against that Steel typing is really rough. Skarmory also carrying that Steel typing makes it a really rough go. Skarmory is actually the worst one out of those. One, because not only can it hit us for super effective damage, but none of our moves are really going to be hitting on a whole lot. Confusion is going to be resisted by the Steel typing. Close Combat and Leaf Blade are both going to be resisted by the flying typing. So Close Combat doesn't even do super effective damage there, it does neutral damage, which makes Skarmory a really, really hard matchup, which we will see quite a bit in the Boulder Cup here. So next, moving on to our 1 versus 0, we actually end up going up to a whopping 81.3%. Torterra, Bronzong, and Skarmory showing up as our 3 biggest losses here, and I definitely think those are the ones that we have to pay as much attention to as possible if we're considering running Gallade in the Boulder Cup. Moving on to our 0 versus 1, we actually end up with a 25%, which is actually pretty good if we consider that we don't have a shield up on our opponent this go around. We only have a few wins here though, with Toxicroak, Poliwrath, Medicham, and Bastiodon actually being the wins. Now, interestingly enough, Medicham is a big one to win up against. Bastiodon is a newcomer into the Boulder Cup, if I'm not mistaken, and Bastiodon is a huge win here. I mean, most of those have kind of a similar theme. Toxicroak going to be super duper weak to our Confusion. Poliwrath going to be weak to Confusion. Medicham, we're going to be able to take a ton of resisted damage, so we're actually going to be able to resist a lot of that damage from him. And then Bastiodon, we're actually going to be able to pump out quite a bit of damage using Close Combat as our, you know, super duper effective damage towards him. So it makes a lot of sense that we do good up against those, which is always nice. Last but not least, in the Boulder Cup, we do end up with a 1 versus 1 shield scenario with a 50% here yet again. Similar to our 0 versus 0 though, we do have a couple of matchup changes here. We actually lose up against Melmetal, Swampert, Jirachi, Torterra, Bronzong, and Skarmory. So the common theme amongst those were Torterra, Bronzong, and Skarmory definitely showed up in 3 out of those 4 shield scenarios. And then Jirachi actually shows up in that 0 versus 0 as well as the 1 versus 1. Melmetal also showing up in the 0 versus 0 and the 1 versus 1 as well. Swampert's the new one there, but definitely, like, I can understand Swampert being there. Even though we do have Leaf Blade, if we give Swampert a shield, it's got such an insanely high damage output as is. It's crazy that we would still end up losing to it, but it does have a lot of damage output. So if you've been following along in our kind of like meh, yeah, nah kind of ratings this month, there's kind of a criteria that I'm using to consider these meh, nah, and yeah. But for Boulder Cup, we actually end up on average with a 51.58%. And if you've been keeping up with how that goes, you can kind of already guess what the answer to would I use Gallade in that cup. But let's actually just hold on to that number. We're actually going to come back to that once we look at our other 2 cups here. Moving on into our Nightmare Cup though, we actually start off with our 0 versus 0, but before we get there, we actually have to talk that in the Nightmare Cup, I actually found it more useful to actually go with Charm instead of Confusion here. Now, just to jog your memory, the Nightmare Cup, Psychic, Dark, and Fighting actually makes quite a bit of sense to use Charm here instead of Psychic, because Psychic is only going to be actually good up against the Fighting typing, whereas Charm is actually going to be really good up against both Dark and Fighting. So it actually helps us out quite a bit if we use Charm as our fast move rather than Confusion. Kind of a similar story that we used in the Gardevoir deep dive as well. So now getting into our 0 versus 0, we actually end up with a 17.6% win ratio here, which unfortunately is kind of low. We do have some interesting wins though. Hitmonchan, Alolan Raticate, and Umbreon. So both Alolan Raticate and Umbreon were insanely bulky back in the Nightmare Cup, and it makes some good notion for Gallade here that we actually beat those 2. Next, moving on into our 1 versus 0, we actually end up with an 88.2%. Now that is huge. We only actually have 1 flat out loss here, which is Gardevoir. And that kind of sets up, for my opinion, on the Nightmare Cup with Gallade. I'll save that for just a second. Next, moving on to our 0 versus 1 though, we actually go down to a whopping 11.8%. We only have 2 wins this go around with Hitmonchan and Alolan Raticate, so we actually end up either dropping or tying up against the Umbreon matchup, which is kind of unfortunate, but considering that they do have an extra shield on us, that does make a little bit of sense. Next, moving into our last shield scenario, the 1 versus 1, we actually have a 41.2% win ratio here. So Spiritomb, Hitmonchan, Poliwrath, Alolan Raticate, Lucario, Toxicroak, and Alolan Raichu are all wins for us inside of that 1 versus 1, which is very, very interesting. It's a lot more than it was in the 0 versus 0, so definitely, as you can see, Charm, even though it's such low energy output, the huge damage output that we have really comes into effect when we have at least 1 shield. It doesn't really matter how many shields the opponent has because we're not relying as heavily on our charge moves as they are in a lot of scenarios. So that 41.2% definitely ends up giving us a lot of leeway in a lot more matchups, which is kind of why that 1 versus 1 and the 0 versus 0 is so much further skewed than it would be if we were using Confusion, because we rely so much more on Charm rather than our charge moves. So on average across all 4 of those shield situations, we actually end up with a 39.7% win ratio. And like I said, if you've been keeping up with that, you can kind of tell where I lie on that one, but we'll come back to that. We only have 1 more cup to get through here. Season 1 regionals, we actually go back to Confusion for this one. So I did find that Charm was a little bit less enticing in this cup just because there are so many more things that Confusion is either going to hit just plain neutral damage to or super effective in damage to, and it makes a lot more of a difference when we have our charge moves rather than just relying on Charm here. So keeping that in mind, starting off with our 0 versus 0, we actually have a 34.8% here, which means we actually have wins up against Whiscash, Quagsire, Haunter, Bastiodon, Melmetal, Lantern, Metagem, and Magneton. Holy cow, that's a lot. So out of those wins, those are some pretty interesting ones. A lot of those don't really have too much ties to the confusion fast move. Haunter is going to take some super effective damage, and outside of that, that's pretty much it. We're basically relying, like I said, heavily on those charge moves like Whiscash, Quagsire, Bastiodon. All those are going to kind of have some issues with Leaf Blade. Bastiodon not so much, but after that, like close combat, especially with Bastiodon there, Melmetal, Lantern a little bit with Leaf Blade. I think I forgot him. Medicham, we're just going to be able to hopefully use Leaf Blade as a neutral damage move to kind of help that matchup. And then Magneton with close combat. It's just going to make a pretty big time for all of those. Next, moving into our 1 versus 0, we actually have a 69.6%, so not the highest that we've seen all day, but still pretty respectable here. We only have a few losses here with Bronzong, Skarmory, Altaria, Tropius, and Umbreon. So, Bronzong, we've talked about, going to resist a lot of our fast move damage, which already puts it ahead. Skarmory going to be able to deal super effective damage and be able to pretty much take resisted or at worst neutral damage by a lot of our attacks. Altaria, it's going to be a monster all in itself. Tropius also falling into that. And Umbreon, I mean, there's some huge tanks there, and there's a lot of super effective damage being thrown around by a lot of those Pokemon, so no surprise that we do have those losses there. Next, moving into the 0 versus 1, we do have a whopping 13%. While that's not the lowest that we've seen all day, it is still kind of low, but at least we're double digits, which is what I like to see. We only have 3 wins here: Haunter, Medicham, and Bastiodon. So those are definitely going to be our main targets in this cup, with the Season 1 Regionals kind of, that seems to be like one of the most talked about ones that I've seen lately. Haunter, Medicham, and Bastiodon are great Pokemon to end up having a good matchup up against, so I'm really glad to see those there. Last but not least, we do end up with our 1 versus 1, which is a 43.5%. So still not quite the highest that we've seen all day, but still very respectable. We do have wins here up against Lantern, Quagsire, Bastiodon, Venusaur, Haunter, Medicham, Whiscash, Melmetal, Steelix, and Forretress. So we do have quite a few wins in the 1 versus 1 there, which is always good to see. I mean, what else can you really say about Gallade in Season 1 when you can say, oh, he beats Bastiodon, he beats Medicham, he beats Melmetal. Like, he has all these great wins, which are just so good. But as far as like averaging out all those shield situations, we still only end up with a 32.72. And if I'm sticking to the format that I've had before, if we compare Boulder Cup at a 51.58 to Nightmare Cup at a 39.7, and then to Season 1 at a 32.72, we actually do the worst in the Season 1 Regionals Cup, which is quite interesting. So I have to say, Boulder Cup being a 51.58% is a definite yes. I definitely think that you should be checking out Gallade in the Boulder Cup by all means. He's a monster. He has so many good matchups there, so many interesting matchups that end up propelling him to have really good numbers. In the Nightmare Cup though, even though we switched to Charm to get a little bit more of our win percentage up there, it still doesn't quite help us out enough, and it kind of becomes a meh. I definitely think that Gardevoir would be the more optimal choice in the Nightmare Cup, but that's just my opinion. I definitely think that Gardevoir puts up way better numbers in the Nightmare Cup, which is why I would probably end up going with that over Gallade. And then in Season 1, we do have a meh kind of moment here again with only a 32.72. We're not quite high enough to really yield like a yes, definite yes. It's kind of a it could work on your team, but it's kind of depending on your team format whether you would go with it or not. I did see quite a few people when I attended regionals that were using Gallade and had quite a bit of success with it. So it's definitely doable. But as far as like a standout Pokemon by itself, like it can pretty much hang by itself, you don't need anything else to really go along with it. It's not really that type. It's more of a let's build a team and kind of put him in a synergetic position so that he excels and does really well. So that is actually going to be it for Gallade today, guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you so much for watching. Of course, all of the Pokemon that we're choosing this month are voted on by you guys down in the Discord below. That's also another reason to go down there and check that out. Unfortunately, Gallade is technically not the Pokemon that we were supposed to do today because there were a ton of votes that flooded in right after I started working on Gallade. But since I had already started, I just said, you know, we're not going to go back and we're not going to like do that. If I already started working on it, then there's no point in that. So Gallade definitely is the winner today. Tomorrow though, we do have some interesting choices coming up. And if you guys want to get in on the voting action, definitely go down into the Discord so you can do that. That is actually going to be it today. I'm just going to go ahead and roll those ending credits here for you. Thank you guys so much for watching. Always remember that if you like to like videos, you could do that, but if you don't, you could be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in the comments below about the video. I do highly appreciate you guys watching. If you guys want to support me in any way, there are several links down in the description for Patreon, joining the community here on YouTube, or even just directly PayPal if that's your thing. I greatly appreciate everyone's name that's on screen, as you guys have showed some sort of support outside of just viewing the videos, and I thank you guys. You don't understand from the bottom of my heart. So until our next video, guys, I will catch you then.